New alarms over what a second Trump presidency could mean for U.S. commitment to its allies and resistance to Russia. It comes as Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban visited Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago right after Orban attended the NATO summit in Washington. This is the second time this year the autocratic leader visited Trump in Florida and follows Orban's unannounced recent meetings with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and Xi Jinping in Beijing. So joining right now to discuss it all, we have former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and MSNBC Chief International Analyst, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, I'm awfully glad to talk with you about all this. Before we get to the Orban-Trump meeting, what did you think of President Biden's NATO news conference and his command of the issues versus Donald Trump's adversarial approach to NATO? And I'm going to play some of what President Biden had to say about his and Trump's relationship with the alliance. Listen to this, sir.
During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful.
How important is the distinction between these two leaders as you are shaking your head?
Yeah, it's striking. And frankly, over the last week in Washington at the summit, two conversations unfolded. One was about the current president, Joe Biden. And I think by the end of the week, he had performed strongly. And frankly, that press conference that you allude to, if you step back and just listen to an hour of back and forth about very high level foreign policy, national security, NATO specific questions, I think all of our European partners came away satisfied. He was someone who showed deep foreign policy chops, and I know he has those. Contrast that with Donald Trump. You didn't show this clip, but I saw one where former President Trump said, "I didn't even know what NATO was, but it only took me 2 minutes to learn about it." I got to tell you, Alex, it took me decades of time to learn it, to understand it. The same kind of decades that our current president has. And certainly when it comes to NATO, there's no contest between these two leaders. And I can assure you the vast majority of our European partners would much rather see an experienced, steady, NATO-oriented President Biden over a Donald Trump returning to office.
I tell you, I listen to what you say, Donald Trump said. His delusional arrogance is really quite something to consider. We mentioned Viktor Orban. Let me ask you about his meeting with Trump, because it is the latest on what he calls a peace mission to end the war in Ukraine. Orban openly endorses Donald Trump for president and hopes Trump will broker an end to the war if he's back in the White House. Is it, though, alarming that Orban is shuttling between visits, unannounced ones, by the way, with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the latter two being unannounced? Does anything about this not pass the smell test for you?
None of it passes any test. And I'll put it this way. Let's back up a bit. For the last couple of years, Viktor Orban has been an enormous thorn in the side of the alliance and in the side of the European Union, by the way. And a perfect example of this, Alex, his personal refusal to admit Finland and Sweden to the NATO alliances, two superb militaries who were pounding at the door to come in, made enormous strategic sense, something NATO had been after for decades. Orban stood in the way until finally overwhelming pressure, including that of President Biden, was applied to him, and he had to cave in. Listen, if Viktor Orban is the answer, you're asking the wrong question. He does not have the status. He does not have the connectivity with the rest of Europe. He certainly doesn't have connectivity here in the U.S. And he is going to, in my view, put a lot of sand in the gears that is going to hurt the NATO alliance. That's been his modus operandi since coming in power in Hungary.
Speaking of joining the alliance there, at the summit, the NATO members declared that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to membership as the Biden administration announced that new $225 million aid package. Was the summit an overall win for Ukraine? I mean, how much will this promised military aid buy in a counteroffensive against Russia?
It was an overall win for Ukraine. And you can't, if you're Ukraine, I would say to President Zelensky, look, don't let perfect become the enemy of very, very good. He got a very, very good package going into the summit, $60 billion, by the way, approved by 75% majorities, both the House and the Senate of the United States, $60 billion from the United States, $80 billion from the European nations, all of that lift under his wings. As announced, 5 new Patriot air defense systems. The gold standards are headed his way. F-16s are landing in Kyiv and other Ukrainian bases right now to go into operation. And he gets a statement from the alliance saying he is on an irreversible course to membership. That is a very, very good package for him. And I'll close with this, Alex. Sometimes people say to me, well, I don't know, do we really want Ukraine in the alliance? Man, I do. As a former Supreme Allied Commander, for example, that is going to end up being the most experienced, high-tech, highly blooded, and courageous land army in Europe coming out of this war. We want them on our team, believe me. And secondly, it's a huge nation full of agrarian resources, oil, gas, Black Sea coastline, geopolitical importance. Believe me, we want them in the alliance. If I'm Volodymyr Zelensky, I'll take irreversible at its Webster's dictionary definition and say, okay, I'm in.
Okay, well, that is very good to know. Quickly, let me ask you one more question with regard to reports that NATO is trying to Trump-proof the alliance. Is that possible?
I don't think it's possible to Trump-proof anything, and knowing the former president, as we all do, he has a tendency to figure out ways to get around almost anything. But I think what the Europeans could do, and what I've advised them to do, is to increase their level of defense spending. They're now, 2/3 of them are meeting the 2% goal. If they could get that up to 100% of them meeting, say, a 2.5% goal, that becomes very attractive to a transactional thinker like Donald Trump. I think that's the most effective thing the Europeans could do. And Alex, they're on the track to do that.
Okay. I always appreciate you and your efficacy in coming on the show and explaining everything. Thank you so much, Admiral. Good to see you.